Greetings! It is I, Tantis Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It's time to continue our expose on anime series and using them in your BESM games. In this one, rather than going to the winter 2016, which I've been doing a lot, I'm bringing in a couple more, I would call them classic series. Now granted, some of them are older than others, and they don't really stretch back much past the 90s, so, I mean, 90s is like 20 years ago, so it is pretty classic. I think one of them is actually only a decade old, but I would call them more classic series. So I'm going to talk about Slayers today, Tenchi Muyo, specifically the Ryo-ohki OVAs, and Shugo Chara. So let's start with Shugo Chara, though. So our main character in this world is Amo Himamori. Now she's a student at Seiyo Academy Elementary, and she kind of has this appearance of a cool and spicy character they kind of refer to her as, and everybody has rumors about her. But in truth, she's actually really shy and doesn't really talk to people, and she just doesn't, she hides her real self, really. So she regrets this, and so the one night she's wishing that she can basically become her true self and sort of show everybody. And the morning she wakes up, there are 3 eggs in her bed. A blue one, a green one, and a red one. They end up hatching into Shugo Chara, guardian characters. And she learns from them that they exist in order to help her become more of her true self and realize her dream. And it seems like that she has a lot of dreams, so that's why she has more than one of these. So she runs into the Guardians, which are effectively like the student council at the school, but they're special that they all have these guardian characters, and they sort of protect the peace at school. They recruit her to be the Joker, because they're all named after face cards from a deck of cards. So there's the King, Queen, Jack, Ace. But anyway, so she helps them out. She assists them with dealing with these X characters, which are corrupted dreams of corrupted characters, corrupted dreams of people, and purifying them. So to use this, they have character transformation and character changes. Character changes are very mild. They're more practical. They give you small abilities. They're you're living up to a little bit of the personality of the person you want to be, more or less. While character transformation is a little rarer, and it takes a little more for those people to learn and use them, but Amu is very skilled at it because she's our main character and gets into it right away, but then that gives you more power and more combat ability, basically, and that gives her abilities of purification. And eventually they learn that there's this company, Easter, which has been looking for something called the embryo, which is supposed to be this powerful, dream sort of thing that grants you any wish, that they've been basically searching the dreams of children and creating these X eggs and doing it. Basically, the same eggs that the Shugo Chara were born from, these characters exist within. The genres for this one, it's a magical girl. That's a good way of putting it. Though technically it can be anything, because there are boy characters too, so it could be also a magical boy too. But it's got that transformation sort of thing. It's got that magic kind of in the air about it. You're living up to your true self, transforming. I would call it a fantasy more than anything, because it has these very fanciful elements of, guardian characters that are in manifestations of children's spirits. And they last you through, I think the oldest people are middle school, maybe high school, before you've realized if you're going to have that dream or not thing, but it's sort of more aimed around the younger people have these sort of dreams like this and get them. And of course then I would call it a school. It revolves around the school here, Seiyo Academy. It's based around there, it reflects it. They do a lot of things related to that. It's a school-based anime. Now I rate this one a 4. I think it's because it's a very good series and very well made, but I rate it a little less because it oftentimes doesn't have the same depth as a lot of other series, and I think that's something that I sort of look to sometimes. So that's why it turned me off from it. And it's a lot of seasons, and basically they did a bunch of different seasons, and after the first one it started going downhill. The last seasons they did are kind of poor and not that great. So I think when you focus on the first 1 or 2 seasons of it. The first one is 51 episodes. It's a good amount of episodes. And after that, I mean, as I just said, it doesn't hold up quite the same after that, unfortunately. There was only so much material that the manga that it was originally based on existed with, and unfortunately, they wanted to do more than what was in there. So it ended up being a little bit more fillery, and that has always ended up being pretty bad when you get into that. So I want to talk about the next one, Tenchi Muyo ryo-ohki. Well, Tenchi Muyo in general. Tenchi Muyo is a large series of anime and manga and materials. I mean, there's a couple of major anime series, some spin-offs, and of course then the OVAs, the ryo-ohki OVAs. Those are the ones I want to primarily focus on, but I'm going to tell you, when you're talking about these ones, I would stick to the OVAs. Those are the best ones, I think. The movies aren't bad. The two series, the first one, that one's okay. The Tenchi Muyo normal TV series. Tenchi in Tokyo is pretty terrible. And the two spin-offs they've had are actually pretty decent. I would recommend those two, because those are focused more around the ryo-ohki universe, and they're spin-offs of it, which is kind of weird that it's spin-offs of the OVAs, not spin-offs of the TV series. Yeah. But anyway, let's talk about this. So, our main character is Tenchi Misaki, and he ends up freeing this space pirate, Ryoko, who had been sealed as a demon many, many years ago. He eventually learns that the one that sealed it there was his grandfather, who has also been, like, in amongst the generations of the ancestry of his family a couple of times in different places. You know, he's, I guess, come into the roles of it. Weird. But anyway, so freeing her, then he ends up, like, sort of attracting all this attention. There's all these other characters. That is Ayeka, who's a princess of Jirai, a planet in space that Ryoko attacked at one point in time. There's her sister Sasami, who's another princess. There's, of course, Mihoshi, who's a detective in the Galaxy Police. There's Washu, who's this genius scientist that was sealed away for some time because she did some very mixed morality kind of things, but she's one of the greatest genius scientists in the universe. And they all have these kind of relations together and kind of get together. And it's very, because it revolves around Tenchi. He attracts them basically all to him. And we learn that he's basically part Jiraiyan, because his grandfather was actually like a Jiraiyan prince that had escaped long ago. Yeah, the storyline is very kind of crazy, a little bit, but it's good and it works. They spread it out over enough, and they all sort of like Tenchi, all the girls. They sort of revolve around him, and they sort of form this big household that, you know, Tenchi is just a nice guy and just wants to do his own thing. You know, he works kind of as a farmer, does a couple other little things. There have been other sort of things where he's done stuff in the Tenchi Muyo series. There's plenty of material from it, so it's worth watching. But yeah, it's definitely a good series to watch. And I said, the fourth season of the OVAs is actually coming out this year, so it's a good time to dive back into it and watch the first three. The first two, I believe, had been on Cartoon Network in the old days, when the Toonami was in the afternoon. Third one never was, so that one you probably are going to have to find subtitled a bit more. I don't know if they did a sub for it. They might have. So this one I would call it an adventure. This is definitely very adventurous. They oftentimes have to go into space for various reasons, go on traveling. Especially like the normal TV series, which I said was pretty good, that has this entire like adventure arc of them traveling from Earth to Jirai. And even when it's in the OVA series, where they don't have as major travels, they still have this sort of level of traveling, and it's very interesting, and it's got this sort of adventurous feel to it. Now, I'd also call it a sci-fi fantasy. That's the thing, is like, it's both a fantasy and a sci-fi at the same time. It's got this sort of elements of sci-fi with aliens, space pirates, galaxy police, that sort of thing, but the abilities and sort of nature of everything seem to have this very heavy fantasy elements to it. Almost like the Jiraiyan technology is very mystical based, that they have these bonds with these like trees, which basically provide them near immortality and power their ships and things like that. It's very interesting that way. And I would also call it a harem, of course. It's one of the classic harem series. It's probably not your first one. I probably can find one of those and eventually will. But it is one of the classic ones. You know, especially Ayeka and Ryoko, they really want to get with Tenchi, but they all kind of like him. Washu likes him, Mihoshi likes him, Sasami even does, but she just, you know, is the most practical one out of all of them, so she sort of takes a step back from everything anyway. I rate with this one a 5. It's one of the classics, it's a great one, you should watch it. I highly recommend it. Now the last one I do want to talk about is Slayers. Slayers began as a light novel, it's been a manga, it's been an anime series, it's been 5 seasons of anime. The thing is, the original 3 were back in the 90s, and then the last 2 were in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s. But it is the quintessential and one of the top animes from the 90s. Like, if people are talking about great animes from the 90s, they're probably going to bring up Slayers. It's going to be on their list of top 10, if not number 1 a lot of times for different people. It is just very well done, and it's very entertaining, and that's the easiest way to say it. And it's set in this world where gods and demons were battling it out, and there's this entire storyline that, like, the world was created from the chaos, the demons want to bring it back to chaos, the gods want to keep the world in check, and they sort of battle it out, and they've gotten into a stalemate into the world we are now, but they're still, like, the influence of the gods, like the dragons are still around, and who are basically incarnations of the gods. And the monsters are still around, doing their thing occasionally here and there. Now it's also a world of magic, very much so, and there are a bunch of types of magic. There's white magic, black magic, shamanic magic, and holy magic. So, but let's get away from the basic setting here and talk about our main characters, because it's important. Because we have 4 main characters that are introduced in the first season. They sort of spread them out, and they're not always starting out in the best, well, except for the first 2 I'm going to mention, they don't always start out in the best, you know, relationship with each other, but they sort of get together and they form the basic team, which goes everywhere. Who we have Lena Inverse. She's a teenager who's a master of black magic. She's incredibly powerful. She's greedy. She likes money and wealth and food. And she also knows her signature spell is Dragon Slave, which like can blow up a city. But she also knows some chaos magic, which is a very dangerous type of magic, which is said that could possibly destroy the world, and she knows some of that. So she's got this she's a very powerful spellcaster. That is really all she is a spellcaster. Now she's accompanied mainly and like all the time throughout the series by Guri. Guri is a swordsman. He, for most of the series, wields the Sword of Light. This, he has a normal sword, which you can take off the sheath from, and it makes a blade of energy that he can sort of battle with. It's one of the legendary weapons. He's also a complete idiot. That's an easy way of describing it. Guri is like, I think he's described as having like the brain of a jellyfish at one time during the series, and it seems to fit his character very well. I mean, he's very loyal, he's very caring, but he just doesn't have a lot of smarts to him at all. Now, the 2 other characters that end up being the main characters are Zelgadis, who's a chimera, a human-based chimera. Basically, he's been like enhanced with like other beings into him, so he's got this kind of rock-like skin, and he's a master of shamanic magic. And of course, then there's Amelia, who is a priestess and princess of this one kingdom that they do go to a couple of times. So, and she's very like hero worshipy, so she's always like, she does a lot of very crazy things that are very entertaining too. But anyway, so those are the main characters. They go on adventures, and it's very good adventures. I don't want to like dive into too much about it, but it's worth watching Slayers. I do recommend it. It's very entertaining. They have such an energy to them. It is, again, like, if you want to see the best series from the 90s, go for this one. Thinking back, I might call it my best series that started in the 90s, that was based around the 90s. That, I might be able to say that, you know, because it's hard for me to remember a lot of series from the 90s that I would call any different than that. You know, it's comparing the 90s and the 80s. Hard to say. But regardless, before I digress too much on, it's an adventure anime. They travel around, they go on these adventures, they go on quests, they're always dealing with, you know, the villain of the week, so to say, that they end up getting involved with, that they have to deal with, that ends up having some kind of earth-shattering problem that they have to deal with, you know? And it's a fantasy world. There's, of course, humans and magic, and a lot of monster races. There's, like, animal races that exist, and there's a large number of them they have to kind of deal with. Of course, there's the demons and dragons, too. And I would call it, then, a sword and sorcery, which technically is a subset of fantasy, but it can be its own thing, too, because you can have a sword and sorcery without fantasy. It's based around, like, you can almost feel like it's very similar to, like, a fantasy role-playing game. You know, it has a lot of those same feelings. Like, granted, the spells and the monsters and the settings are very different, but it has the same feeling of something like a Dungeons and Dragons. You know, it's got that fantasy gaming type feel, the sword and sorcery type feel, where people are living and dying by the sword and the spell. Now, of course, I rate this a 1 of 5. There's no denying it. I've already kind of gushed on about how great it is. I kind of want to rewatch it again some point soon. But anyway, so that's it for today. I've talked about these 3 anime. I have gone over a little bit about them. I've told you about their genres, how much I rate them. In the next one, which should be coming up a little later on today, I am going to talk to you about using them in your BESM game, which will be a very interesting one for these three. They're very different and very fun to do. So, if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like this video. It shows your support for the channel, the Empire, and for the work I do. And please subscribe if you already haven't. Always looking for more citizens, more members of the Empire. And please share this video. If you know anybody who will learn anything from it, or would just enjoy watching it, share it with them. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.